Welcome to Asian American Life, our special edition, Speak Out, the Rise of Anti-Asian American Hate. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo, and we're in Chinatown, where many people and Asian Americans from coast to coast are feeling fearful and anxious. Coming up, we talk to special guests from across the country about the violence and aggression against our community. But first, Susan Jun has a report on what the past year has been like.
Disturbing videos of violence against Asian Americans are sadly a familiar sight these days, with an alarming surge in Asian hate crimes raging across the country. Hate attacks against Asian Americans rose nearly 150% in 2020, while decreasing for the general population.
Chinese virus.
Kung flu.
Anti-Asian sentiment, many believe, is fueled by former President Donald Trump's repeated racist rhetoric, blaming the COVID-19 virus on China.
Asian piece of
Oh my God. Get out of here.
From racist remarks to vicious attacks and murders, the alarming acts of hate have been escalating.
I don't want them under me. Tell them to move.
In March of last year, reports started to circulate of Asian Americans being sprayed with disinfectant, spit on, pushed, punched, and stabbed. In July, an 89-year-old Asian Brooklyn woman was set on fire by two boys. The local case made headlines and helped to raise awareness of the growing anti-Asian sentiment.
I don't know why anyone would ever do that. I feel so bad for her. I hope she's okay.
Sadly, the winter turned deadly as a violent attack in San Francisco by a 19-year-old on 84-year-old Thai American Richard Ratanapati later resulted in the elderly man's tragic death. March saw a grave turn in anti-Asian sentiment, first with a series of mass shootings by a 21-year-old man at 3 Atlanta spas that left 8 people dead, 6 of them Asian women.
I feel like I'm just pressing down a lot of my emotions, and I know it's going to come out one way or another.
In late March, a 65-year-old Filipino woman was attacked on her way to church outside a luxury apartment building in New York City. A 38-year-old man kicked the woman in the stomach, knocked her to the ground, and repeatedly stomped on her face, while surveillance video shows 2 building workers watching and doing nothing to help. As the attacks continue, those in the Asian American community are fighting back, like this 76-year-old Asian grandma in San Francisco, who was punched in the face and fought off her 39-year-old attacker, hitting him with a stick. These senseless and horrific acts have sparked protests across the country and have outraged family and friends speaking out. Like Sam Chen, whose 52-year-old mother was attacked and thrown to the ground by a 47-year-old man in Queens this past February. Actress Olivia Meng, a friend of the family, brought widespread attention to the case after she posted about it on social media. The attack, like many, was not treated as a hate crime, which is why Chen is now speaking out.
Joining me now is Sam Chen, whose mother you saw in Susan Jun's story was brutally attacked in Flushing, Queens back in February. Sam, thank you so much for being here today. First of all, we want to ask, how is your mom doing and how are you doing?
She's doing great. She is going about her life per usual. We try to limit her exposure to the media so she's able to continue living the way that she does. So super grateful for that. For myself, I'm doing well.
Is your mom's case being labeled as a hate crime now?
Currently, I don't believe it is being labeled as a hate crime as well, just because I'm not sure if there are sufficient proof still by the DA's findings. Being Asian and being a woman, slightly older, smaller stature, I definitely think, based off of my own bias, and I know it's a bias, I think that it is.
So, your mom's attack happened back in February, and it really was the first attack in the winter that captured mainstream media's attention, thanks to, your good friend, the actress Olivia Munn. As one of the first to speak out about this, What is your reaction now to the continuous reports of attacks on Asian Americans?
It's shocking that it has escalated so quickly since then, and the reports are even more aggressive than before. And some of the attacks are ruthless. I think it's an absolute terrible thing. But personally, I believe that there will be people who are watching the different segments and also started copying some of the movements.
I thought about that too, what you just said, that while it's good to speak out, there is this fear that it may be also inspiring other people to attack people this way, sort of like these copycat crimes. Is that what you're essentially saying?
I definitely think that they're even more of a target now because of the media awareness and people watching these news over and over again. And they know that we usually don't like, well, I can't say we, but there's a good amount of the elderly community who can't fight back.
I know that your mom has asked to remain anonymous, and she is just like many Asians who really just want to sort of keep quiet about this. But for you and your family, you and your sister, it was actually really important to speak out about this. Can I ask why?
We're just pissed, man. We want to find this guy. We want to bring him to justice because we can't do anything. We can't do anything that would jeopardize any of our careers or anything silly. The local news started picking up. At the time, we're still trying to hide our identities. We actually wasn't showing our face, and it was like mostly our backs and hands. But the amount of attention ended up going national and / international. So at that point, I kind of felt a duty to stand up and speak out for our community because I'm not sure if there will be another chance like this for quite a bit.
Well, thank you, Sam, and to your family for speaking out. We wish you and your family well. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you so much, and to you guys as well.
Joining me now is Detective Henry Chung. He is with the NYPD Asian Hate Crimes Task Force. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is John Yang. He is President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC.
So we just heard from Sam Chen. He is the son of the woman who was attacked in Queens back in February. And I know that Detective Chung, you can't specifically talk about this case, but I do know that many who are watching are wondering what actually defines a hate crime.
If there is a verbal assault on a person based on their identity, race, religion, also compounded with some type of physical action, someone being pushed, kicked, spat at, that in New York City and also in New York State is considered a hate crime. So there's a little difference between having someone say things are offensive, but then a different level when you're being assaulted verbally and also physically. If you are a victim of a hate crime, especially in New York City, even though if you are not sure if you are a victim based on whatever incident that occurred, please contact the NYPD.
What is your organization asking of law enforcement, since we have the detective here?
Part of this is this community-centered response. So what that means is, number one, making sure we have officers like Officer Chung that are linguistically capable, that are culturally capable, that can work with witnesses, work with victims in a manner that they understand, that they feel comfortable with. The reality is that there are many in our community that are uncomfortable with law enforcement. We do have concerns that sometimes the law enforcement can be racialized in a way that works against all of our communities. We've all seen some of the videos that have gone viral that I would call out that have shown African Americans attacking Asian Americans. We know that's not the reality of what's happening, rather that the attackers of the Asian American community come from all sorts of different communities. They're still predominantly white. But the fact that there are some that are going viral, what more than anything our community wants is safety. It's ensuring that there are community centers that people can go to. Like Detective Chong said, many of these incidents don't rise to the level of hate crimes. In fact, the data from Stop AAPI Hate, as well as our own organizations, affiliations, website, Stand Against Hatred, show that about 90% of these incidents, of these attacks, would not rise to the level of a crime.
John, your organization actually, you coordinate these bystander training workshops, right? Who should be participating?
Absolutely. And number one, anyone should participate in these, because these really give people things to do, ways to act if they see an act of hate. It could be as simple as, if someone is hurling racial epithets at another person, drop your keys in front of that victim to start to deflect, distract from what is happening. You know, if you are in a position where you feel comfortable saying, hey, that's racist, stop that, you should do that. It teaches you things such as, if you are in a position to do so, get someone over to this scene so that they can help you. The other thing you could do is document, and Detective Chung talked about this, is making sure we have a record of what happens. If you can videotape it, great. If you can record it, great, because that will provide evidence, not necessarily only for law enforcement, but just so we all know what these stories are, so we can address them in a meaningful way.
What has this been like for you personally? Detective Chung, can I ask you that question? If you could share, some of your personal thoughts about what's going on in the community.
It affects our community. It affects me personally because I have family here in New York City and also around the country. I hear stories from my friends and also some of my relatives about certain incidents that occur. And it's just very, very gut-wrenching when some of these incidents that you hear, either from a family member or from a friend of a family. Yeah, and that's why I volunteered to be on this Asian Hate Crime Task Force, to try to use my my abilities and my skills to help put an end to this, or at least stop it from occurring.
And John, can you just share sort of your personal experience this last year, what it's been like for you personally?
Sure, and as Detective Chung says, personally, certainly it's heartbreaking. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of anguish, there's a lot of anger that I feel, and certainly if the community feels. But I will also say that with all of that, there's also this feeling of hope and solidarity. Yes, what we are seeing at this moment with what we're talking about here today is racism against the Asian American community. But what we've seen over this past year as a whole, and then through the arc of history, is this virus of racism that we need to tackle.
Thank you to Detective Henry Chung, and also to you, John Yang, for joining us in this very important discussion. Now, here's Rainer Ramirez's report on how Asian Americans are creating a safe space for our community.
And he starts shouting, "You fucking gooks," and he starts making threats and telling us to suck this and do that. And then he passed us, and I turned to my son and I said, "Did that just say what I think he said?"
And I was like, "Yeah, he did." And then we just started yelling back at him. We were like, "You racist, you piece of human garbage."
Sulaine Moy and her son Otter Lee have had enough.
Sometimes we're told not to escalate things, but in our opinion, it's better to yell it back to hell. When we experience something like this, we want to make sure no one else ever has to go through that again.
Asian Americans are fighting back, creating community safeguards in a time of hate. Mutual aid groups are popping up across the country. In California, volunteers with Protect Oakland Chinatown patrol the streets of their community. In New York, volunteers escort seniors and Asian Americans through SafeWalks NYC. And in April, Cafe Madicab raised over $100,000 in 2 days to pay for cab rides for Asian Americans afraid to take the subway. Mother and son have shared their own experience and safety tips online. For Asian American Life, I'm Rainer Ramirez.
Joining me now from Minneapolis, Minnesota is Kalaya'an Mendoza. He is a human and civil rights activist, and he's also the director of U.S. programs of Nonviolence Peaceforce. We just saw in Rainer Ramirez's story how the Asian American community is trying to keep each other safe. Now, this is a space that this is your expertise. How do we keep our communities safe when we are rallying, when we are organizing, or even when we're doing our daily tasks like going to work or school?
Yeah, one thing that I have folks really kind of like look at when they're building out their safety plan is, have you built right relationship with your neighbors? Building relationships with those who you live around is like such an integral part of building community safety and mutual protection. So moving from building right relationship to practicing what's called situational awareness using this tool we call the OODA loop. It stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It's really important for one to always be aware of their surroundings, to be able to identify any potential threats and to start coming up with what are your exit strategies? How do you either show up as a upstander or how do you intervene?
How do we talk about this to our young people, especially children?
I have so many friends who are parents who are, teaching their children to be aware. And this is something that I've seen from my Black comrades and family who are having to teach their children on how to keep themselves safe from the police and white supremacist violence.
The viral videos that we are seeing really has added this layer of tension between the Asian community and the Black community. And many say that this is a dangerous media narrative. How is this impacting the coalition building between people of color?
Since the civil rights movement, our Black comrades and family have been the ones that have been fighting for the inclusion of Asian Pacific Islanders and other immigrants to be here on stolen land, to be here as community members. The narrative of Black versus Asian is one that is really rooted in anti-Blackness, white supremacy, and the model minority myth. And it's really on us to look at our shared histories, whether that's with Yuri Kochiyama working with Malcolm X and Black leaders in the civil rights movement, or Grace Lee Boggs, who has, until the last moment of her life, has continued to organize within Black and Brown communities in Detroit.
You have spent your life on these peacekeeping missions, whether it's here in the United States, where you are right now in Minnesota, or overseas. In fact, the Dalai Lama, even recognized the work that you have done. What has this year been like for you personally?
When I'm not in Minnesota, I live in Jackson Heights, Queens. We were the epicenter of COVID-19. And at a time when this government turned its back on us, at a time when we were watching refrigeration trucks being filled with the bodies of our neighbors, people came out of the woodwork, neighbors who didn't know one another, to provide mutual aid and mutual protection, because we saw that the government didn't care, that we needed to be the ones to keep us safe. From that, we saw that we are the ones that that know how best to protect and care for our communities. Mutual aid groups have sprung up all over the country. So this entire year has really pulled back the veil on the inequities of this country, especially inequities that are faced by people of color, by disabled folks, and folks who are most marginalized. And what we are seeing is that this old way of doing things, the old world is crumbling. White supremacy is crumbling. We are all coming together from a place of vision that Dr. Angela Davis called us to. We need to reimagine a better future.
Thank you so much, Kalaya'an Mendoza, for joining us. And please, please, please stay safe.
Thank you.
Coming up, Asian American lawmakers find their voice and push for change.
Kung flu, the Chinese virus.
It comes from China.
President Trump clearly stoked the flames of xenophobia against AAPIs with his rhetoric.
Vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who've been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated.
Joining me now are two Democratic lawmakers, Congressman Mark Takano, representing California's 41st District, and Congresswoman Grace Meng, representing New York's 6th District. So now with President Biden announcing new actions to respond to this, and also with your COVID hate crime bill, how will this stem the hate?
We're pushing legislation that would do a couple of things, to provide more dedicated resources and personnel at the Department of Justice to sort of streamline these sorts of incidents and cases, to be able to make it easier, provide guidance locally to make it easier for victims to report these incidents. A lot of times we just tell people to report, but there's so many obstacles in actually making that report.
So I feel like every time I open up my Twitter page, there is a new incident of violence. How do you assure that our community will feel safe, even just stepping outside our front door?
You've been feeling that new incidences come along, seems like every day. These law enforcement agencies need to know that AAPI people often are reluctant or reticent to report hate incidences or talk about them. And so I think there's a really high likelihood that we're seeing an underreporting. And what we're seeing now is just attention being paid to these things that have been occurring all along.
After the House passed your anti-hate legislation, Representative Meng, your voicemail, I know you made this public, right, was filled with these hateful, really, really disturbing messages that were left to you. What has this year been like for you personally?
Sometimes it's just been really frustrating because we've sort of been warning everyone that this would happen and that these incidents could increase if we continue to use those types of languages. So it is incredibly frustrating. I am thankful, though, that so many from way beyond the Asian American community have spoken up and are standing in solidarity with our Asian American community in trying to combat these types of incidents.
Congressman, I wanted to ask you, because I know that you have a personal history with the racism in this country. Your grandparents were interned at Tule Lake during World War II, and your father spent some time, his childhood there. How can we encourage teachers and also schools to start teaching this very important history so that we don't repeat this?
My parents were both at Tule Lake and at Heart Mountain. My father bears the scars to this very day below his shins. He was like a 2 or 3 year old little boy playing near with another young man, another little boy near an incineration pit where they burned the garbage. Can you imagine being a mother in such a setting? No privacy anymore, mass showering, and then dealing with a little boy that's gotten burned on his knee. I mean, why did this happen? There were no people like Grace Meng and me in Congress. Zero. You know that even J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, someone that many of us in the civil rights community don't really think well of, he actually advised against the internment of Japanese Americans. And so did the Attorney General Biddle, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt had such political pressure to do this. But there were very few political leaders at the time that spoke up.
Congressman Meng, you recently said that we have a finite time to make these changes happen. What do you mean by that, a finite time?
I'm worried that we have a short runway in which the mainstream society is paying attention to these issues. You know, people don't know enough about Asian American history. People also don't know enough about Black history and Native Americans and so many different communities' contributions to this country's history. And I really want to make sure we're taking advantage of every second.
Congressman, like, what are some of the things that Asian Americans at this moment now need to speak out against?
They need to speak out, continue to speak out against the hate incidences that occur in a community. They need to establish relationships with local law enforcement, assert themselves. And if it's not local law enforcement, it's the city government.
Congresswoman Meng, you could close this out with your call to action, because I know for you personally too, you know, you in a way have found your voice, you said.
So many of us have grown up kind of used to and sort of learning to compartmentalize and internalize a lot of the racist things that we've heard consistently growing up. But I think in recent months, you know, from the young people who've been organizing and teaching us older folks, older Asian Americans, that we have to speak up. to so many of the allies from other communities who stood up with us. I'm just so thankful. And knowing that when we stand together, we can amplify each other's voices and have those necessary and challenging conversations, and hopefully, you know, get over this and work together to, in the long term, to break down those walls of biases and stereotypes that we have grown way too accustomed to in this country.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Congresswoman Meng. Thank you, Congressman Takano, for taking the time to join us. And like you said, I do hope we see some changes soon.
That's our show for now. If you want to learn more about these stories, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Asian American Life. I'm Ernabel DeMillo. We'll see you next time.